That's a challenge for a lot of companies and groups right now is finding people that won't feel tokenized to participate in something that is predominantly white.
Right.
And that's just a huge issue right now. And so I'm really curious as to how you've navigated that and what that call in you to address and be honest with yourself about to create that space for belonging and vulnerability for people to feel comfortable.
I think the
themselves.
first thing was I wanted people to hold me to task. I wanted to like see perspectives I hadn't seen before, and that's kind of where it starts, is that willingness to say, I'm not perfect. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty imperfect and probably always will be, but I can still like work on my blind spots. Mm-hmm. And so I knew I wanted that.
Success is not achievable alone. We all have a story of a person who took a risk, someone who imagined a life greater than what we could, someone who stood in the gap. This show shares those someones, those unsung heroes who pushed us when we could have settled for what is. I'm Derrin Slack, and this is Stood in the Gap, the show that focuses on the who, not the how, behind a leader's success. All right, my friends, we are here on Stood in the Gap podcast, and I have my friend, colleague, mentor, and longtime buddy, Thaddeus Rex here, and he's the CEO of iTeam. So, hi, Thaddeus. Thank you for being here.
Derrin, it's an honor. Thank you, my friend.
Yeah, no problem. We always start our show with the same exact game, and so I'm just going to jump right into it.
I know this part has me nervous too. All right, let's roll with it.
Nervous? So rapid fire questions. I'm going to ask you either this or that with two items, and you've got to pick the first thing that comes to your head.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, Thaddeus. Live in South Korea or Japan?
South Korea.
Play or musical?
Play.
Art gallery or history museum?
Art gallery.
Silver or gold?
Gold.
Be 5'2" or 6'9"?
I don't care.
Pick one.
Oh, you mean heights?
Yes.
5'2" or 6'9"? 6'9".
6'9". Long hair or short hair?
Short.
Workout at home or workout at the gym?
Gym.
Ethereum or Bitcoin?
Ethereum.
Oh, iced coffee or hot tea?
Hot tea.
Live in England or Scotland?
England.
England. So why England?
Just I don't have to live in Scotland.
That's good. Well, thank you for playing and indulge me in that game.
Absolutely, man.
But this show...
That was way easier than I thought it was going to be.
Yes. Yeah, it's not that. It's real laid back and chill here. So,
excellent.
So you're good. But let's get right into the premise of our conversation today. And this show, Stood in the Gap, is all about people that have stood in the gap for the leaders that join us on this podcast and share their story. And so I'm just going to ask you the question I ask every single guest that comes on this mic and just ask you, what 6 to 10 words changed your life and helped shape you into the leader and person that you are today?
So one of my grandmaster's top students, a guy named we call him Professor Miller, because once you're a 9th degree black belt, like a master means 5th degree black belt. Once you're 9th degree, you get to be called whatever you want to be called. He said professor, so that's what we called him. Wow. He lived in Harlem, and my grandmaster lived in Brooklyn, and I feel really honored. I got to meet them several times and work with them. And Professor Miller, he taught me this mantra. It's actually a really common mantra if you YouTube it, but it's not only like a way to release, but it's also like I think it's like a path to grace for yourself and for others. And the words are, I love you, I'm sorry, forgive me, thank you. And it's, when you asked about the 6 words or 7 words that are most important, those came to my mind because I've used those a lot since learning those from him when I was like 24 years old.
In what way? So like, how is that like lived out in your life?
Well, usually when you screw something up real bad and you have to give yourself grace,
that's right. Yeah.
It's a path to that. Yeah.
Sure.
So I think there's, we make the mistake of thinking like, why'd you do this or why'd you do that or why'd you make that decision? And The truth is, I think there's usually like 27 and a half different reasons why you make one decision and not another. And you don't even know, a lot of times we're humans and we have to make decisions without having all the data. And sometimes we make the wrong decision. And you have to, if you want to improve, you have to be able to make new decisions, which means you have to admit you made the wrong one. Right. And sometimes give yourself grace for that.
So talk to me about your experience in earning your black belt and like how did that come up? Like, why is that a mantra that is taught within that?
Oh, that's Professor Miller. He teaches everything. He's a whole life kind of guy.
Sure.
It's actually amazing some of the things I've brought to him. He's like, oh yeah, and he knows it. Anything that's self-improvement, I'll use words mind control, but when I say that, I mean like controlling your own mind and having that focus. He's truly amazing individual, and my path to martial arts. It's actually my sensei was in Bloomington, Indiana, first sensei I had, and I was a college student. I was actually a college dropout. I was kind of a professional drinker at the time. I took a year off college. I was pretty stressed out. My family life wasn't too good at the time. And I had a younger sister who was literally almost dying. And so I lost my parents, and my 16-year-old sister actually moved in with me. I became her legal guardian because my parents were pretty swamped and couldn't take care of her. They were busy visiting hospitals around the country. And I was just, at the time you don't realize it, but at the time I was pretty depressed. And, you know, when you're young, you think it's your fault or something wrong with you. And of course there was something wrong with me. I don't know what, always working on overcoming that. But I had a neighbor. So I used to bartend at a pub in Bloomington, Indiana. And my neighbor was a regular in the pub. He was like a grad student. He'd come in every couple weeks. So he started pestering me to join his martial arts club. And I was like, no, I don't do physical things. And because I honestly hadn't worked out ever in my life. It wasn't something I did. I wasn't into sports. And he kept pestering me. And so I just started making excuses. And but one day he kind of tricked me because I had told him I was going to help someone with their paper. And he brought that guy to the pub and said, hey, he's going to come to work out too. You guys can work on the paper after. And I was like, so I went to work out because he actually walked over to my house and picked me up and took me.
Right.
And I get there, but he was no excuses allowed. Yeah, he was very persistent. And I got there, and I didn't know what I was doing. I'd never been in martial arts, but he was so encouraging, and just little things. I think that positive encouragement was probably something at the time in my life I was really looking for, but also that idea that I can do this.
Right.
And because you don't always believe in yourself when you start something.
That's right.
Because when you first start it, you're no good at it. So of course you don't believe in yourself. But over time, I kept going to the workouts, and I learned I loved being physical. Like, being physical is fun if you do it a lot and you're in shape. It sucks if you're out of shape to run up 3 flights of stairs, but it's pretty cool if you're really in shape. And so all these things I never thought I'd do. Eventually, I was doing, things as training for my black belt that I never thought I'd do. I'd get up in the morning, I'd go on a 22-mile bike ride, and then jog for a couple miles, and then do push-ups and sit. I did that like every morning, just a normal thing because I wanted it so bad. So I think having that, getting in touch with my physical body was really key to overcome like all the stuff in my head.
Sure. Yeah.
And then I was able to tackle other dreams, and being a musician was like the dream.
Right.
And like when I got my black belt, I didn't even go to my graduation. I don't even know where my diploma is from college. I did eventually graduate, but I have no idea where the diploma is, but I have my black belt certificate. And I invited all my family, my grandmother, everybody. They all laughed because I shaved my head the morning of the test, and they all came in and didn't know where I was.
Right.
And but I was so proud of that. And it taught me, like, if you work at something every day, you really can accomplish amazing things. You can't do everything. Like, being an NBA star wasn't my thing, no matter how hard I worked at it. So I can't do everything, and I can't do anything, but there's a lot I can do.
Sure.
And so you find those things you can do if you just work at it every day. And it allowed me to just put huge goals in place.
That's good. Yeah, I experience you as someone who's very focused and disciplined, and so I can see that. And you've had some success and a very interesting background. I met you as a corporate, musical trainer. Like, how would you describe yourself the time I met you through the Rotary Club?
That's right.
You remember?
I don't know. I mean, I basically was doing keynoting and using the guitar to make it interesting.
Right.
So after martial arts, I decided I wanted to be a professional musician. I spent several years as a starving artist. I got lucky. I got onto a PBS show. It was a very small show. I didn't make much money doing the PBS show, but it increased my reputation, and I was able to start doing performing arts centers. So I toured as a professional musician for like 10 years, and then went into keynoting and consulting, which was I thought it was going to be my awesome dream job, but I really didn't like it that much, to be honest. I found it hard to be. It's hard to be authentic as a keynoter.
Wow.
Because you have to craft the thing that the audience wants to hear is why you get paid, not the thing they need to hear. A lot of times, part of it too is when you're talking to an audience and you have to talk to the CEO and the secretary and the people who clean the dishes and the executives all in one keynote.
Right.
Like you have to get pretty general. You can't really dig in to anything. And it's not that you can't cover what they need to hear. It's that the message that the VPs need to hear shouldn't be would be inappropriate for others and vice versa.
Sure.
Right. So you kind of get caught in this kind of generalizing it. And it's more entertainment than anything else. And you don't have time to make lasting change, like those great takeaways. In my experience, they seem really exciting, but the change doesn't really last. Like people go back to work and fall back into their normal habits, right? And change takes sustained pushing.
Sure.
Or just sustained presence. And I know your whole thing's called Stood in the Gap. And I think if you want someone to truly help you through a gap, it's not a keynote or a book or something, or a one conversation. It's usually like a relationship.
Yeah, it's deep relationships.
Yeah.
It's getting to know the other.
And I remember when you and I first met, you had this amazing energy, just really positive, understanding, accepting. It was very fun to have you as a friend then.
Sure.
And super excited to see everything you've built.
Yeah, well, you're one person that stood in the gap for me. I mean, you've had this amazing company now called iTeam. And iTeam has invested in CEOs and executives across the city. And I think you've even expanded outside of Indiana even now. And that's a way that you are giving back and giving a piece of yourself to go deep in relationship with these executives to help them in their life and in their business. So
it came from that keynote realization, realizing that relationships were the key to change more than performances. So
what's the story behind iTeam then? Like, how did that come about after doing this keynoting and the music? Like, now you have these CEO think tanks.
Right.
That's
well, it makes perfect sense to me. But so a lot of it is going back to martial arts and setting crazy goals.
Yeah.
That typically the way I make a decision in life is I'm just like, oh, that's cool. I'm going to build that.
Right.
And I don't care how hard or how long it is. I choose something that's realistic, but then I'll just go do it. And so iTeam was one of those things. When so I did consulting and keynoting. And the consulting, I also found it, I worked my way up into some really big companies, and I found it to be less fulfilling in some ways. I mean, they loved it and it was effective, but you would be working, part of it's me and part of it's just the process. But you'd be working like director of consumer affairs in a call center to reduce turnover when they implement new technology. And I was recognized as like an expert in motivation, having worked with leaders in the field and done a lot in my former career with that. And so that's what I was hired to do a lot. And it was great to see, they'd be like, wow, our training company was anticipating like a 15 to 18% turnover rate, but you got it down to like 8.
Right.
And you're like, woo.
Like cool. Yeah.
Yeah. But the questions I always wanted to ask, like a lot of my clients, I was too out of the box on the things they were working on. Like I would typically come in and start asking questions about, so they'd have a goal they want me to help them hit, and I would start asking questions about why they had that goal. And over time, I actually hired my own coach, consultant, because I needed someone to stand in the gap, right?
Sure.
And and he made me go interview all my clients. And he said, so I had to come up with a list of questions, go back to all my former clients in the consulting world and find out what they liked best and what they would see me doing next, or what they could see, what else, not like I'm doing something totally different, but who would they see me helping next?
Sure.
And when it came to like the part they liked best was always that first 30 to 60 days when I was asking all the questions about their goals, questioning their goals, and usually helping them realize they were working on the wrong goals.
I see.
And then the goals would change, but I got stressed out because I have a 6-month project. So you have a 6-month project for like $80,000, and 2 months in, the whole scope of the project changes, but my budget doesn't change, my time frame doesn't change, and I still have to get it done.
Right.
So from my perspective, I was very stressed out. And then me doing the project wasn't their favorite part. So the part I thought I had to give away for free was actually the part they liked best.
Oh, wow.
And Mike, I know, huge realization, right? So my coach, he goes, sounds like you're a coach. And I was like, no, I'm not a coach. I'm a consultant. For some reason, I had this hang up on the word coach.
Yeah, mindset.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There was no good reason for it. I couldn't explain it.
Sure.
I just had this idea that being a consultant's better, so that's what I was. And he's like, well, tell me again the part they liked best.
Right.
And that was the part I liked best. Mm-hmm. So when I finally realized that, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to shift. That's the part I need to build. Sure. And going back to the realization that relationships are so important, I wanted to do it in a way that helps people build relationships with each other and not just with me. And honestly, I think we can solve bigger problems when you have more people at the table. So iTeam is these think tanks. It's a chance for these CEOs to come together and share what they're working on and get advice from each other. And the feedback, it's honestly a huge joy when you ask. So I'll ask, like, what do you like best? And some will say, I like that when I have a problem, I need it solved right now, and I come in and I get the one piece of advice I need, and I leave, and by 3 p.m. the problem's solved.
Right.
Like it's like that just-in-time thing, which is awesome. But that's more practical, right? Mm-hmm. The stuff that gets me really excited is when you talk to them and they're like I've had several CEOs say it's a place to bring my whole self.
Right.
Like as CEOs, I think CEOs have to role play a lot. So when you're in front of the community, you have to act like this, but with investors, you have to act like that. And with fundraisers, you have to act like this. And so you're always changing. But there's no place you get to bring all of it. Yeah. And that's so to get that feedback, it's like, wow, that's really cool.
And I'm part of iTeam myself, and the value for me personally as a leader, like formerly feeling like I was on an island. And then being a part of a community now where people understand the struggle. Right. And I'm a CEO of a nonprofit, all right? And most of the executives are from different industries and sectors and different size companies. And it's like, wow, you're going through the same shit I am, right? And I went through that a month ago. And so here's what I did. And we're all learning from each other. And you're right. Like, it's not so much about the looking at problems and commiserating, like you're actually solving problems and investing in our lives. And that's incredibly valuable. Right. To create that safe space of belonging. Yeah. And it leads to energy.
Totally. I think it's really important to, if I had one piece of advice, it was very hard for me to learn to accept help from mentors and then eventually to seek them out. And the Grand Master in martial arts was a huge part of that learning experience, like some of the things he taught me. Because when you're in martial arts, like you just have to do, like, they're like, you're coming to my house for dinner tonight. I'm going to show you. And you're like, okay, yes, sir. Right. Right? Because they can break your arm if they want to. That's right. You're like, which they won't do, but they will twist your finger and put you in a lot of pain until you like, thank you, sensei, thank you. Mm-hmm. And you'll, so forced mentoring, but he was also very much able to meet me where I was and give me what I needed. Right. And that was huge. So then I started learning how to seek out mentors. And I think it's really key to recognize that there's no mentor out there that's going to be everything you need. Like every mentor has like these 2 or 3 things you need, and but they can't be everything for you. And because we're all human. We all have strengths and weaknesses. So learning, there are mentors who I know build me up, but there's also the mentors who may not even realize they're mentors, but like those friends who are really comfortable criticizing stuff all the time. That's right. And sometimes when you put that new curriculum together, or you have your new website, before you put it up and you really want like harsh criticism, you can't really go to the people who are really good at telling you what you want to hear.
Yeah.
You have to go to the people who are going to be like, well, that sucks 7 different
you gotta
ways, and
speak
here's
life.
why.
Right, and be truly authentic with you. Right.
So when in January 2020, a couple years after we started iTeam, I had an investor on board, which was awesome, and I learned so much from him, and he brought a lot of resources to the company. But one of my first assignments was to build an advisory board, and I started thinking, okay, well, how do I do that? And I started asking mentors, of course, going out to all my mentors, and I was hearing common stuff like, well, you have to have a minority, you have to have a female, you have
Sure.
you have to have an accountant, you have to have a lawyer, like all these things, and I was like, why?
Right.
Like, what's the purpose? And it's always something that's bugged me is when you have random goals. So when people, and I think this happens with diversity a lot, where they say, well, we have a problem with diversity in this organization. We're only 6% diverse, so the goal is to make it 7.5. And you're like why?
Yeah, it's very arbitrary.
Yeah, and I think it's a way to avoid having like true goals.
Right.
So I didn't like hearing the idea that you're supposed to have one minority and one woman with no sense of purpose behind it. So I went to, and I feel really blessed that I had this guy in my life, a guy named Dr. John Bamforth. He's a former CMO at Eli Lilly, and he'd become a mentor of mine. So I took him out to coffee, and he's one of the people I go to with like really crazy leadership challenges, because he's been a leader in a large organization.
Right.
And I tell him, yeah, that's what I'm hearing. The first thing he says is, well, that's tokenism. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
And it struck me so hard, because it was really bugging me, but I couldn't put the words on it. And he just nailed it. Like, that's exactly how I felt.
Yeah.
And I felt it was all wrong, but I didn't know how to articulate that.
Sure.
And so as soon as he said that, I was like, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. And he was like, well, why would you want minorities? Why would you want women on your advisory board? And I was like, as a facilitator, like when you're working with a group of people, it had become really viscerally apparent to me in a way I hadn't seen before. Because you become so aware of the room and what everybody's feeling and going through. Like having a black man in the room does not give black people a voice. It became really obvious, right? Having a woman in the room does not give women a voice. And so, and being CEO only, I knew we were going to be pretty heavy on middle-aged white guys. Like that's just, for now, it's going to be that way.
That's the fact.
And
right.
I can't just make someone a CEO and I can't put people in the think tank who aren't CEO. Like it would not work.
Right.
And so I said, well, that's the thing I want to solve. He said, well, how would you do that? How's your advisory board going to help? And I was like, well, if I could create a voice in the advisory board, like if I could create an advisory board that was at least 50% minority, where they felt comfortable telling me what they actually felt, then at least I could learn.
Right.
And maybe it would help me get good advice. Because I think we all smart CEOs realize the future of the world is more diverse.
Right.
Like America's changing, and it's not going to be a majority white people very soon. And so there are very good business reasons to want to evolve, and that's a great place to start. But there's so many like, this is the right way to do things reasons to do it too, right? And that's where I was starting, but I was like backed up. So I'm getting ahead of myself. So I wound up creating. Or I didn't really create it. I put out invitations, and I got lucky. I had to ask a lot of people, but I found people who said yes. So I wound up creating.
And it's hard, that is, because that's a challenge for a lot of companies and groups right now, is finding people that won't feel tokenized to participate in something that is predominantly white.
Right.
And that's just a huge issue right now. And so I'm really curious as to how you've navigated that, and what that call in you to address and be honest with yourself about, to create that space for belonging and vulnerability for people to feel comfortable.
I think the first thing was I wanted people to hold me to task. I wanted to like see perspectives I hadn't seen before, and that's kind of where it starts, is that willingness to say, I'm not perfect. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty imperfect and probably always will be, but I can still like work on my blind spots. Mm-hmm. And so I knew I wanted that. And I thought, so I wound up, the people I asked, the board wound up being all minority. And then we did have one guy, we called our token white guy, but Chris Wayne was a CTO at Yahoo. He joined the board for a while, for about a year. And but also have Danny Porte, the CEO of Professional Management Enterprises, Jimmy McMillian, who's general counsel at Indianapolis Motor Speedway, Rafael Sanchez, president of private banking at Old National, Mark Jackson, he's former director, global director of HR management systems at General Motors.
Wow.
And then we just had Dr. Leon Jackson join, the chancellor of St. Joseph's College.
Yeah.
Super excited to be working with him. So having them as advisors has been honestly life-changing, because I feel like there's some really honest conversations about struggles that they go through as men who are minority, and I recognize like now our next step is adding more women to the board, right? That's trying to just get bigger ears, so you can learn and listen to your own blind spots.
I like
and
that.
How do you see into that better?
Get bigger ears. Oh, I like that. I love that a lot. And so so I always say that diversity is a fact. Like, we're all diverse in various ways. Inclusion is an act. Belonging is a feeling that we create when we are actively engaged in being inclusive.
Right.
And then equity is the outcome. And so with iTeam, like, it started off this very like white organization, but now you've done a phenomenal job just including people and bringing them in and making us feel like we have a voice. Like, you'll call me sometimes to get a quick advice on how to approach something. Not everybody has that mentality. Like, how do you speak into that with other leaders who may not be so good with people as you are, if you will?
To me, it starts with, this goes back to one of my mentors, a guy, Dr. DC, who kind of created the field of study of intrinsic motivation, intrinsic versus extrinsic. So extrinsic, like, hey, if you get that done, I'll pay you extra, but if you don't get it done, you're grounded all night, son, right? So if you want to motivate your son, you can try extrinsic rewards, or you can create intrinsic motivation. So when someone creates a work of art, like, there's no reward. They just do it because they want to. That's pure intrinsic motivation, taking care of our kids. No one rewards us for it. Matter of fact, it's quite the opposite typically, but we keep doing it because we love them. And that's intrinsic motivation. So this guy, Dr. DC, and I got very lucky to get to take him out to breakfast and meet with him. And then he mentored me and helped me build my first professional development program, my first presentation to adults, to people, like, not a musician, was like because of him. And he always said, if you want to motivate people, and I think it's also important to think about this in terms of motivating yourself, is that you have to remove, he calls it controlling words. He says, be autonomy supportive. I'm like, okay, that sounds complicated. What's that mean? He says, well, you have to remove controlling words from your language. So words like have to, need, ought, should, must. He said, just remove those, especially if you're trying to motivate someone.
Sure.
Instead, replaced with, have you considered, what if? Is it possible that? And I try to do that with myself as well. And so I think maybe if you really, I think diversity is a very valuable goal. And I think there are lots of other valuable goals that your listeners probably want to pursue.
Sure.
It could be, taking care of their kids and their grandkids, or it could be building a better neighborhood, or it could be, just having a better vacation, or maybe it's just not caring about any of that and having more peace with less. Like, all those are great goals. They're all just different.
Yep.
I think it's key to remind that there is no should, there's no must, there's no ought to. They're just, people are, and I think the better we can learn to understand that. And it's not just that we shouldn't put that should on top of them, but help remove them from us too.
Sure.
That it's okay for them to, and some people are just going to be who they are, and you can just, like, we have a whole process in iTeam to filter people out who might be, honestly, if you're super stubborn and stuck in your ways, like, how are we going to help you?
Right. Yeah, you can't grow. There's no growth mindset.
Yeah. So that's kind of a core prerequisite.
Yeah.
That we're lucky that it was just built into the business model. But
beautiful.
I think for anyone out there, who, like, no matter what you want to accomplish in life, that there are people who are going to support it and there are people who are not. And you get to choose who you spend time with. Right. And you also get to choose, I think, you and I met in Rotary. And the transition out of being a professional musician I knew was going to be really tough.
Right.
Not just to learn how to do it, but for my personal brand and how to rebuild my brand and everything else. And the first thing I decided was I needed to spend time with people who were doing things I wanted to do. And so Rotary was a way to spend time with people who were donating their time, but also running companies. Right. And a lot of my best mentors came from those first few experiences because they saw what I was trying to do and they wanted to support it.
Sure.
And if you can find successful retired business owners, like they love to give typically, they can't give you everything. But when it comes to like business, they tend to know what they're talking about. You can, and they want to help. Sure. So I think finding a way to go spend time with the people you want to become,
that's beautiful,
is really key if you want to overcome more gaps.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And so speaking of gaps, then on the journey to closing those gaps or standing in the gap for others, I want to close with your thought on grace.
Okay.
And so if you can share a little bit about what it means and what it looks like to have grace for yourself and for others as you work to help others overcome obstacles or close the gaps in their lives.
Right. So going back to the advisory board, I had one of my advisors who I've called many times with very difficult questions, a lot of them about business, and so much experience and so generous in the advice I get. And honestly, when someone like that is willing just to answer the phone and take your call, it means a lot. And he held me to task about a year into our relationship. He said, "Thaddeus, I always answer the phone. I appreciate helping you. And you call whenever there's problems. You call when you have a crisis. And I give you advice. And then I hear from you again when there's another problem. But I never get to hear what happens with the last one. And I'd really like to hear a little bit of that feedback. If I help you, that's what motivates me, and I'd like to hear about it." And I think that's really important to remember when people help you through a gap, that you have to tell them about it, because that's what motivates them to maintain the relationship. And I've made the mistake of thinking with mentors I have to pay them back, or they don't do it for that. They don't want your help. They don't want the payback. They don't want you to help them get clients or anything like that. They do it because they want to help you.
Yeah.
And the best payment you can give them is to call them and tell them they helped you and how. Yeah.
It's beautiful. Thaddeus, thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing a bit of yourself with us.
It's been my pleasure, Derrin. Thanks for doing this. Talk to you soon.
Talk soon, brother. ProAct is an organization that primarily serves vulnerable youth in Indianapolis. And we have been incredibly fortunate to incorporate youth voice in the design of our programs that have touched over 20,000 boys and girls since 2010. Our podcast, Stood in the Gap, showcases the stories of business and community leaders in Indianapolis and beyond. But as this show is evolving, we want to highlight our youth and their voice in an intentional and impactful way. So now, our youth are joining me on our podcast to come share their stories and questions for the leaders on our show. Enjoy our conversation. All right, my friends, we are so excited to have Mr. Christian here with me, and he's joining me for a conversation to let us know who he is. So, Christian, thank you for being here today.
You're welcome.
I'm welcome. Yeah, how you feeling this weekend so far?
Good.
You feeling good?
Yeah.
And you're in our program at which school?
Greenbrier. Yeah.
And that's in Washington Township?
Yeah.
And how are you liking our program so far?
It's fun. I like helping people.
Everyone says that. Can I get another thing except fun? What about educational?
Oh, yeah. It teaches me a lot. It teaches me a lot.
What does it teach you? What's one thing you've learned?
They teach us about mental health.
No mental health?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, mental health then, what aspect of mental health did you learn about or enjoy the most?
Oh, we learned things that could lead to like mental health,
Okay,
like mental health problems,
sure.
like family issues, um, trauma,
Okay.
and
And this is not a quiz, so you can, and you're not going to get graded on this.
I don't know the
All right,
rest.
and so it's okay. And so Christian, then, so we start every conversation off with our youth guests with you asking me some questions. And so you've pulled out 3 questions that you would like to ask me from a deck of cards that we have in our office that's called Our Moments. And so it's your turn to start with asking me some questions. So go ahead.
What was the most difficult transition you've experienced in your lifetime?
The most difficult transition that I've experienced in my 34 years of life so far has probably been the transition to being a father. I am a father of 2 people named Tyson and London, a 13-year-old and a 7-year-old. And when I had my 13-year-old, I was in college, and I had no clue what I was doing. And I still don't, 13 years later. But it was a difficult transition because when you're 20 years old, you aren't expecting a little one. And I had my son while I was in the middle of college, and having to hold a young life in your hands and realize that you had to grow up very fast in that moment, and realize that my life was not my own anymore. My life was for this child. So I had to make that transition early on, and then here I am. It was difficult. It was fun, but I would not trade it for anything in the world.
All right. Where in the world do you feel the most comfortable?
Where in the world do I feel the most comfortable? Probably in... Ooh, where do I feel most comfortable? That's a great question, because I can think of like so many places. I would say I'll say this answer, not one obvious question or one obvious answer like my bedroom. I'm going to say Turkey Run. I go to Turkey Run just about every year, at least once a year, for like 3 or 4 days, and just unplug.
What do you do at Turkey Run?
I do nothing. So Turkey Run is a state park in Indiana, and they have these little cabin rooms, and it's a little hotel at the state park. But in that area, you get no cell service. There's internet there, but I try not to take my computer or anything because I'll get tempted to work. When I go there, I read, I hike, and I just sit in silence most nights, just thinking and meditating and praying and it's a moment for me to reflect on my life and all the great things that happened in my life.
Who is one person in your life you are thankful for and why?
I am most thankful for right now, let's say Pitt Thompson. He's our board chair at ProAct, and so he's like leading the team that is my boss, essentially, Christian. And he is just always there for me. And he came into ProAct at a time that was very difficult for me because ProAct was changing a lot of things. And there was a moment in ProAct where I had to either leave the organization or stay in the organization and grow. And so there was a time where I stepped down as CEO, and so I said, hey, I don't want to be CEO anymore because I need to be in a position to learn and to grow. And Pitt stepped in, and he was my mentor, and he came in as CEO for 2 years, and he taught me a lot. And so, Pitt Thompson, I'm very, very thankful for you and for everything that you continue to do for the organization. That good?
Yeah.
So, it's my turn to ask you some questions?
Yeah.
All right. Buckle in, because your first question, Christian, is who is someone that you want to thank in your life and why?
That's a hard one.
I just answered it.
My dad, because when I was down, he helped me And my mom did that too. So my mom and my dad, when I was down, they helped me up. Or if I fell off my bike, they would help me up. Or if I needed something, they would help me.
Okay.
Or if I was hungry, they would cook for me.
Oh, awesome. And so that they are just really good at taking care of you then. I love it. Well, Christian, we always ask this question of our youth, and we know that we live in a world right now where people aren't always happy often or enough. And so I'll ask you the question, what do you think happiness is?
What do I think happiness is? Well, I think happiness is helping people or doing something that you really love.
And so what are some things that make you happy?
Playing sports,
What's your favorite sport?
basketball.
We played basketball together and you got whooped. Do you remember that? Yeah, and so you really enjoyed that because you're a pretty good player. I'll give you that.
You
But I
dunked
wasn't
on
gonna
me.
let you, yeah, I wasn't gonna let you win. I did dunk on you several times because you kept talking mess. But it made me happy to see you happy with me playing with you, right? And so my next question is like, what is something that people misunderstand about you, Christian?
Well, when they first look at me, they may think I'm a bad kid, but once they get to know, well, they might think I'm quiet and don't talk much, but once they get to know me, I'm a really outgoing person and I talk a lot and I'm not quiet.
And so they might think that you're a bad kid, though. You said that. So what does that mean? And so why would they think that you're a bad kid?
Oh, well, a lot of people think it. I don't know why, but they just do.
You think it's because of the way you look? Or just like...
My
what do
friends,
you
probably.
think? Your friends mostly would think that? Okay, that's good because you're not a bad kid at all. So I appreciate that you have that awareness that people might think that, but you do a lot of great things to prove them wrong, right? And so my next question then, Christian, is what is one thing that you learned about life not from teachers? So from your parents, from programs that you've been a part of and experiences that you've had. What's one thing you've learned about life?
One thing I learned. Well, one thing I learned is how to. This is hard.
It's okay. You take your time. You're doing a great job. So if I were to ask it in a different way, what is the greatest lesson that you've learned about life so far?
Not everything goes your way.
Okay, not everything goes your way? That's a great answer. And so what do you mean by that?
Because maybe sometime you will ask somebody for something and they might give it to another person.
Okay. And so you can't get everything that you want in life. That is an important lesson for someone to learn at your age. So hold on to that because it's so true. And when we look at PROACT, I mean, our mission is to stand in the gap for vulnerable populations while empowering youth to actively transform their communities. And so you're doing that each and every week when you engage in service projects and workshops, and when we learn about social issues in our community. And so I'll ask you this last question, Christian. How would you encourage other youth your age to stand in the gap for others?
Well, you should start giving people stuff, helping them up when they're down, and teaching them stuff they may not know that you know.
That's good. Yeah, one of my greatest joys is when other people teach others something I taught them. So it's cool to see you teach other people something that I taught someone that taught you. Does that make sense? It doesn't make sense? Well, it makes sense to me. Well, Christian, I appreciate our conversation. I appreciate you being so cool and so mature for your age and everything. And so I thank you. So thanks for your time today.
You're welcome.
Now, let me ask you, who stood in the gap for you? What are the words that changed your life? If you can answer that question, then I want you on the show. Send me a message at Derrin@proactnd.org. That's Derrin, DERRIN, @proactnd.org.